Right, that's the agenda for this evening. There's quite a bit to get through, as you can see, in a relatively short amount of time. As Jennifer mentioned, there will be a Q&A session at the end, so please make a note of any terminology that you don't understand or points that you'd like me to explain a little bit more. So for those of you unaware of Build Manager, this on the screen is our 12-step self-build process map. The online platform is based around these 12 steps, and there's guidance and templates for each phase. This evening, we're going to be delving into the first step, which is establishing your budget. Just a little bit about me. I currently work as a managing estimator, as Jennifer said, and that's for a main contractor. We have a team of 5 estimators, currently securing around £50 million worth of work per year across a variety of sectors, including housing. So we would typically price or deliver 200 houses per year. If me or my team get the costs wrong, then the company obviously loses money, which is not an option. We've got a good track record of getting the costs correct, and I want to convey how we do that to fellow self-builders. So I'll quickly run through the basic processes that main contractors would use when assessing and pricing a potential housing development. As Jennifer mentioned, I've recently completed my own self-build. Pictures on the screen. We started in March 2021 and completed in August last year. There's a case study on the website with a few more details and a full breakdown of costs if anybody's interested. So I think, therefore, I know firsthand how difficult self-building can be. I've been in the industry a long time and I still found it difficult. And that's part of the reason that we've created Build Manager early, to spread some guidance. We thought we'd start off by identifying the challenges that you as self-builders face when producing your own budgets. The first item is it's a huge risk for you. If you get your predicted costs wrong, it can be devastating. It's likely to be the biggest investment you will ever make, and there are no guarantees that you'll get it finished if you start with unrealistic costs in mind. Securing additional borrowing is difficult once you've started, so again, you need to get your costs correct up front, and you'll find it difficult to exit an unfinished self-build. So we can't stress enough how important it is to get all your ducks in a line initially before you start. There's a NAXPA survey that's been recently published, which asks the question to completed self-builders how accurate their budgets were and if they went over budget. The report found out that between 10 and 35% of people, went between 10 and 25% over budget, and 15% of the completed projects went over by 25% or more. So self-builders, I think it's fair to say there's a fair few get the budgets wrong, but main contractors don't. So that's what I'm trying to pass across and get you to think like a main contractor. The second challenge is time. Bear in mind that when one of our estimators produces a budget for a housing development, it will take them 4 weeks. And this is with the aid of professional estimating software, which makes it a lot quicker. They will have a sound knowledge of the construction industry, and they've got assistance from a team of colleagues. So as a self-builder, you're likely to have none of these, so the odds are stacked against you. So just don't underestimate the amount of time that you should be allocating to getting your costs correct up front. We think there's also an over-reliance on builders. And by that, I mean, if you're speaking to a general builder, you're likely just to get a lump sum quotation to carry out the works. What you need to understand is you need a fully itemized breakdown of costs. One, so that you know exactly what you're getting, but it also strengthens your position when it comes to paying invoices. For example, you'll know how much work has been done, so you don't overpay too early. So in order to do that, you need to you need to have your own schedule of works and add costs into that. The final challenge is education. Construction estimators such as myself, we spend all day, every day pricing jobs, and we're constantly learning. Somebody will typically spend 2 to 3 years as an assistant estimator before they're pricing jobs on their own. As a self-builder, again, you're likely to have little or no background experience, and you need to get your costs right first time. So it is a steep learning curve, but there is guidance out there to help you. So the solutions, the huge risk, we mitigate the risks by following the steps and guidance here and on our website. And if you do that, you'll be able to start your self-build with accurate costs. You'll be allowing sufficient contingencies, and you'll be able to track your costs during the build. And in turn, you'll be able to react to any financial issues as they arise. For example, when I built my house, I managed to stay on budget. And that wasn't necessarily because I got my costs bang on before I started, because there were factors outside of my control. There was a lot of material price increases during the time of the build. But the important thing is I knew about that, and I identified it at the time. I had the information in place to identify where I had overspent and by how much. So knowing that means I could then factor that into my future costs. I knew that I had to save money somehow. In my personal experience, for us, it involved doing quite a bit more work ourselves. But if you know that you're overspending, then at least you can react, and you do that before it's too late. And with managed risk comes reward. If you get it right, the potential equity you'll generate building a house is significant. I've got a few advantages being in the industry, but we did make a significant amount of equity doing the build. But the key word is managing the risk. If you're unaware or you ignore the risks, then the costs can be huge. The solution to the time aspect is allowing a sufficient amount of time. It's tempting to get started pretty quick because it's an exciting stage for you, but we would encourage you to take stock and iron out your costs before you start. Main contractors don't start early. They don't put a spade in the ground until they know exactly what they're building, exactly what their costs are, and they've ironed out all the risks, and a self-build should be no different. So based on that, I think you should be allowing circa 3 months to start from afresh and get a fully detailed cost plan. It seems to me a realistic amount of time, bearing in mind you're going to be fitting it around other commitments. And education, I mentioned it's a steep learning curve, but there is information out there. All I would suggest is just bear in mind the impartiality of the information. If somebody's trying to sell you a product, a service, then it's not going to be impartial advice. You need to satisfy yourself you're happy with the information. And remember, if at any stage you're uncomfortable following the guidance and completing the templates that we're about to go through, we do recommend that you seek additional help. We have self-build coaches available, but there are also freelance quantity surveyors and project managers in the industry that will help you. You can still stay in control of your project, but you just need to identify where you're lacking in skills and get people in at that time. Mistakes are very expensive in construction, and therefore professional services and advice, they do usually pay for themselves. So moving on to the initial budget. It's sometimes called a feasibility study in the industry, and it's a way to establish likely overall project costs based on 4 main variables. The advantages of completing one are, it's quick. You should be able to complete one in a couple of days, and it's free of charge if you know where to look for the information. It's designed to save you lots of time and money. the results of the initial budget can filter out unsuitable potential building plots before you spend money on investigations or deposits. It also sets expectations early. It provides a comparison between your aspirations and your available project spend. Most people know what they want, but few have an idea of likely costs before they've invested a significant amount of time and money. It's very easy to get swept up in grand designs without an early indication of cost. And finally, it allows you to have meaningful conversations with mortgage brokers. You'll have a rough idea, you'll have a rough cost to base your lending requirement discussions on, and it will also prevent future issues if you realise at a later date that you were nowhere near where your costs needed to be. But there's a bit of a health warning here for this stage, the initial budget stage. A budget is not a maximum cost. It's by definition not fixed. It's a best guess based on the information available at the time. And to mitigate this, we include contingencies at each stage, but the potential variation is still high. We usually tell clients 10 to 15% either higher or lower, but it's by no means guaranteed at this stage. And it's also not your final costing document, it's just the beginning. It's designed for use as an early sense check only and will be replaced by a cost plan. So when would you use an initial budget? As I mentioned, it's for the early stages only. After you've established your affordability, you can use it right up to the point of securing planning. It can be completed with very little information, and you can keep updating it as more information comes to light. But as soon as you've got a detailed set of plans, then you should be moving on to producing a cost plan. So how to create your own? There's a template which I'll just get on the screen. I'll just quickly run through it. This is the template budget spreadsheet that we'll be emailing out to you. I've pre-filled it in just by way of an example and to speed things up. So this form includes all the factors that you need to consider at this stage. So starting at the top, plot purchase, fairly self-explanatory. You would enter in here the cost of the building plot. So in this example, we're going to say the building plot's £200,000. It's worth noting that you can still complete this if you haven't got a building plot in mind. You would just enter the likely figure of a building plot in your search area. This section here is what we call preliminary costs. So this includes all the associated costs of self-builds that aren't specific building costs. There's a fair few to go at, and these typically catch people out if they haven't gone through it before, because the fees and all that, they do add up. So legal fees, conveyancing fees, obviously that's just a legal cost of purchasing a plot of land. Most of these items do include recommended costs for you to input initially, just for you to have a first pass at completing a quick budget. But like I said, we'd encourage you to get fixed quotes where you can for each item. So the professional fees and services, we've got a raft of different things there. We've got topographical surveys, utility surveys, ground investigations. These are all things that you may not need, but you may need, and it sort of builds up your information about the site. Architect's fees you will need, unless you're an architect. You're going to have to get some drawings produced. And structural engineers fees, they'll deal with any foundation designs or steel beams, any parts of your structural frame. They'll do sense checks on that, and you'll need that to get building control sign off and structural warranties. Planning and building control fees, fairly self-explanatory. You just initially just enter the figures that we've put there as a guide. The finance costs, these can add up. If presuming that you need a self-build mortgage, then there's quite a significant amount of fees to consider. These will be confirmed when you speak to your mortgage broker, but this just gives you an idea of what to expect. There's also a fair few insurances that you'll need if you're getting a self-build mortgage, and you probably want one anyway to protect your asset. On-site costs, this is where it can vary slightly depending on how you intend to deliver the scheme. Are you employing a project manager, for example? If so, enter the cost there. You're likely to be able to need to provide welfare for your contractors on site. That's where you'd enter that cost. So fairly minor unless you're looking to employ a project manager. So that deals with the preliminary costs. So now we move on to the building costs, which is this section here. Site preparation. So pay attention to this section if your potential building plot is not a greenfield site. If you're buying a plot with an existing building that you're looking to demolish, this is where you'd enter those relevant costs. And if likewise, if it's not a greenfield site ready to build, you may have some initial upfront costs to break out hard surfaces, tarmac, concrete, etc., to get ready to build. The site strip and topsoil. So most people wouldn't ordinarily expect, well, wouldn't factor it in initially. So just bear in mind how you're going to actually build your house. You're likely, if it's a relatively small plot, you probably strip the whole site in terms of you'll excavate 150 to 200 mil of topsoil. You'll excavate that and dispose it off site. That's because one, you can't build on it, and two, you're going to need to stone up, put hardcore down to create access in and around the site. So there's some sample figures there. I've just applied the rate shown by an approximate area. So you can quickly do that calculation yourself. Now we're on to the construction costs. This is the main item on the form. So this quickly estimates the cost of building your house based on the variables that we're just about to discuss. What you do is you multiply the relevant rate, which I'll go through, by the floor area of your house. That's the GIFA. It's a technical term. It stands for the gross internal floor area. So you would measure the floor area of your house. So if it's 2-story, make sure you measure both stories. It's not a plan dimension. It's a floor area, a total floor area. So along the bottom, there's a tab called construction costs. So at this point in the form, we'd select that tab, and we're presented with this table of rates. It looks quite daunting, but it isn't really. We've just got to make a series of decisions as to which cost to use. So the first item that it's asking us for is story. Is it single story or is it 2-story? So in this example, I'm going to say it's a 2-story house. So straight away, we're now down to one of those figures. The next option to look at is the internal floor area, the size of the house. So which banding does it fall in? You may not have plans yet. So just by way of example, on typical house sizes, a standard 3-bed is around 130 square meters. A standard 4-bed is around 180 square meters. A 5-bed's 220 square meters. And then the executive 5-bed is anything over 280 square meters. So in this example, let's say we're building a 4-bed house at 180 square meters. So we are now narrowed down to this selection here. The next thing to consider is the location. Let's say it's in the Midlands. So now we're down to that section there. At this point, you need to decide your build route. And by that, I mean, it's one of these 4 options here. So DIY and subbies. When I mention subbies, I mean subcontractors. So to explain the DIY and subbies route, This is based on doing some work yourself, building the house, and you self-managing some of the trades. So it's unsurprisingly the cheapest option, but it is the most risky, and certainly the most involved from your point of view. So don't base your costs on this route lightly unless you've got a good experience in the construction industry. The next option for building your house or the build route is just using subcontractors. So this is not carrying out any physical work yourself on site. This is employing people to do the work for you, but you would be managing them under this route. Again, a good knowledge of the construction industry is required for this route because you're going to need to know exactly who does what, and you're splitting the trades up. So you're not getting a general builder in to do the whole thing. You're getting different trades to do each stage of the build. The third option is the general builder and subcontractor route. So this is where you would get a general builder in to carry out most of the works and or manage subcontractors alongside that. So typically a builder would say put the shell up for you, so they'd deal with everything involved in building the house up to getting it watertight. That's quite a common route, and it is a good option for a first-time builder because it's less involved, less risky, but it's slightly more expensive. And the final option is main contractor. So these are your turnkey projects where you get somebody in to do the vast majority, if not all, of the works on site. It's the least risk, obviously, and it's the least involved from your point of view, but it is the most expensive. So just going back to our example, if we say we're going down the general builder and subcontractor route for a 2-story house at 180 square meters in the Midlands, we're looking at one of these 3 figures, and the only option left to choose is the level of specification. So are we going for a standard specification, a high specification, or an excellent specification? So let's pick the excellent specification for this example. So based on this, based on that sample case study, we're going to say the build cost is £1,601 per square metre. Now that might seem really cheap if you're looking at information online, but bear in mind, this is just the rate to build the house. There's a lot of extras calculated on the template. So 1601, go back to this page. So in this column now, we can enter the size of the house, 180 square meters, times by the cost per square meter, 1601. So that's produced a build cost of 288,000, which were relatively quick, painless, good guide initially. But we do need to consider any site-specific abnormals because those rates are based on a fairly easy build. There's no abnormal cost built into that. You'll need to do a bit of research on this section for it to be relevant to your specific plot. There is guidance out there. There's guidance on our website of where to find this information. It's what's known as a desktop study. So you can do information, you can search for information online about your specific site, and it should throw up any abnormals that you might need to allow for. And at this point, don't forget the purpose of this sheet. It's an initial budget sheet. It's not a fixed cost. The aim of the sheet is to find out if a scheme is viable for you. So if you do identify some abnormals and you do make an allowance to deal with those at this stage, if it's still viable, having made those contingency allowances, then it's a good early indication for you to carry on with the scheme, as in at that point you would start to instruct surveys and spend money drilling down on the costs. But you've done that initial sense check, it's not time wasted. So in this example, I'm going to say there's no abnormals, but like I said, you'll need to satisfy yourself on your specific plot, and there is sample figures there to allow if you do suspect one of these is required. So moving on to the external work section, relatively straightforward. There's a cost shown there per square metre, so you need to make an assessment of how much of each item you're going to need. So how much access road, parking, driveway do you think you're going to need? The quantity of footpaths. Do you need a new entrance onto your site, or is the one already there? The amount of topsoil and turf you're going to need, landscaping allowances. So, like I said, I've pre-filled them in just for speed, but that is based on the guidance within this form. You also need to look at drainage. There's foul and surface water drainage, and these figures shown here are typical allowances. Again, if you suspect any abnormals, so if after you've done some research and there's no mains drains in the area, then you're going to need to increase these rates at this point. Services, this is the cost that you will allocate to get main services to your site, electric, gas and water. Again, these are based on fairly standard connection costs. If there's no mains in, there could be abnormals and by no means fixed. So that's one of the things we recommend you get a cost for as soon as possible, because there can be early showstoppers. The builder's works in connection with main services. So that deals with any trench work that you will need to include for a main service company will not include for any trench work within your site boundary to get the electric, gas or water to your plot. So you'll need, your ground worker or your builder will need to allow for that. Planning conditions. So you may not know this at this point, but this is a list of the typical conditions. If you don't have the information, then one possible solution is checking the local planning websites. If there's been a recent housing development in the same location as your building plot, then it's all public information. You can look at that planning permission and all the associated documents. It will list there any conditions that they've had to adhere to. So you can use that as a good guide of what you're likely to be subject to. And finally, there's a contingency. You should always include a contingency, especially at this early budget stage. We usually suggest between 5 and 10%. So for this example, I've put a 30k contingency. So within a relatively short space of time, I've got a feasibility budget of £598,000, which I can tweak moving forward as more information comes to light. I can update all these figures and just keep an eye on it. So that is the initial budget document. So we've done the initial budget document. We can now do a couple of sense checks. The advantage of doing the document means you can tailor your self-build early. So any one of the variables can be quickly tweaked in the template until you find a happy compromise between the size of the build, the project location, the builder and the specification. If you're looking to tweak things, I'd recommend tweaking the specification level and the size of your build first, because these are the easiest variables to change. You can increase the specification at a later date. That's always an option. And good architectural design can make up for a smaller floor area. I'd warn against being tempted to change the build route in order to get what you want, because if you're stepping down a build route from a general builder to a subcontract route, the step up in involvement and commitment from you is significant. So just do that with caution. So I'll just run a quick example on the sense check. So this example spit out a total budget of £598,000. Let's say, for example, we only want to spend, or we can only spend £525,000. So we're a bit adrift at the minute. The scheme as it is isn't viable. So the first step is, well, my first step would be to look at the specification level. So if you remember, we chose an excellent spec, 1601. If we reduce that to just a high specification, then that figure drops to 1274. So go back to this page, go back to this cell. So I forgot the figure, 1274. So at the minute the area is staying the same, but that figure is now reduced. So that reduced our build costs significantly. So let's check what that total now is. So the total's been reduced to 539,000. So now we're getting somewhere it's within range of what we want to spend, but it's still not quite there. So let's say if you're that close to your budget, just tinker with the size of the building. If we remove 10 square meters off the building, so go from 180 to 170, reduces it further, and we're now within a couple of £1,000 of where we want to be, which is bang on. And the important thing is, it might seem like you're trying to make it fit, but think of it as though you're setting your expectations early. So with this in mind, you know that the specification isn't as high as you initially wanted, and you've now got a fairly good brief to speak to an architect on the size of house you can afford. You've got a set measure to speak to them. Okay. There are additional sense checks you can do at this stage. So you need to be checking what your borrowing requirements will be based on that budget figure, and you need to satisfy yourself if that's affordable. I mean, there will be sense checks with discussions with your mortgage broker anyway, but you need to be comfortable, bearing in mind the current interest rates rising. Stress test the payments, just make sure you're happy. And you also need to check, well, I would recommend checking that the anticipated valuation after you've completed your build exceeds the cost of the build and any cost of borrowing. It may not be your primary purpose to build to make money or generate equity, but if you don't, then you're going to be limiting your options in the future. Okay, so we've produced the initial viability. We've done the initial budget. It's viable. It's passed its checks. Now, we would recommend proceeding onto a detailed cost plan. So what is a cost plan? It's a fully itemized schedule of works, which includes all the activities required to build your home. And it also includes fixed costs for each item of work. It's not budget figures, it's fixed costs. Why do you need one? One, it allows you to establish specific costs for your build. You can use it to formulate inquiries in order to get quotations, and you can later use it to record actual costs incurred and track your spend versus the quotes you had before starting. So as I mentioned, in my particular case study, my self-build, I was able to identify overspend early, but I had time to adjust the future costs. I've put a note on there. There's various options online to pay people to produce a quotation for you. It's a good idea if you use the right people, if you use professional quantity surveyors, but there's quite a few companies out there which will sell you estimates for your build for a couple of £100. I'd just like to put a bit of a health warning on that, really, because I would never use one. They're somebody else's assessment of costs using standard building rates. There's no such thing. It's not an offer to complete the work, it's just somebody's assessment. So the difference is, if you produce your own schedule, you can use that to get quotes for people to provide an offer to do the work for you. It's no good basing your costs on what you or anyone else think it should cost. It's what somebody's prepared to do it for. So until you get specific quotes for your build, you don't know your costs. Average data means nothing. A cost plan, as we're about to discuss, becomes a working document bespoke to your build. which includes specific quotes to carry out the work. There's 4 main steps to producing a cost plan. The first one, you need to define the scope of works. So you need to understand exactly what is required to build your own home. Every activity that is required from start to finish to build your house. It's sometimes referred to as a bill of quantities. We've got a template which I'll quickly run through, which can be tailored to your self-build, but there's a certain amount of knowledge required to adapt it to your build. So if you're not confident in either adapting ours or producing your own, then we recommend you speak to one of our self-build coaches or approach a quantity surveyor, an independent quantity surveyor. It will be money well spent. Just consider if you've got the knowledge to produce a full scope of works. It's, like I said, if you're new to construction, it's a big ask because you're likely to miss a few things, and the cost of missing those is more than offset by paying somebody to do that initial build for you. Step 2, once we've defined exactly what's required to build the house, we need to define exactly who is doing what. So our template again includes some guidance on this. It'll tell you typically who does what on site. It'll vary depending on your build route. If you're using a general builder, then they're going to do a lot of the works for you, but it's still worth having that document so that you can have those conversations, so that there's no misalignment of what you're expecting is included versus what the builder is quoted. Next step, so we've defined what needs doing, we've defined who is doing what, then we need to get some specific quotes for the build. So this is where the cost plan comes in, because you can extract all the relevant items from the cost plan and use that to formulate an inquiry to get a set of quotes from, say, some bricklayers. If you're going down that route, if you want to split up the packages and get a bricklaying firm in to just deal with the masonry aspects of your build, then you'll have the information there to send them. And it makes it so much easier if they're pricing your bill or your schedule when it comes to comparing quotes, because otherwise the quotes won't be on a like-for-like basis. Just a couple of tips on sending inquiries. You need to talk to them before you send in inquiries. It's not the easiest thing to do by any means. Make notes of the people you're speaking to, gauge their interest, and introduce yourself. You're basically aiming to separate yourself from the time wasters, because good companies can and are selective. If they suspect it's a waste of time, you just won't get a response from them. You need to keep the inquiries as concise and specific as possible. By that I mean, don't just dump a load of information on them and expect them to delve through it and do some, extract what they need. Just send them the information that's specific to them. You need to give them sufficient time to quote, but check in with them a couple of days before you've asked for the return. We usually allow 3 weeks for people to get quotes. And it's inevitable that not every inquiry you send out will result in a quote. You should aim to get 3 quotes to get a good comparison between the quotes and establish the market value. But bearing in mind, not everyone's going to return, I would suggest sending five inquiries for each trade that you're looking at. Updating your cost plan. So just a quick run through. We've confirmed what's required to build the house. We've identified who is doing what. We've sent out inquiries. We've got inquiries back. Now you need to enter those quotations into your cost plan. And once you've done that, once you're happy that all the costs are included, then you've got an accurate build cost predictor at this point. And it can be used going forward, but I haven't got time this evening to explain, but very briefly, that document is now used to control costs. You can review the costs you've spent versus the costs that you predicted. So like I said before, that's about knowing exactly where you are financially. and I'll just quickly show, I'm just mindful on time, I'm running over, but this is the document that a professional quantity surveyor or main contractor would use. This is just a summary page, and our particular version is split into the mortgage drawdowns that you'll likely need. If you've got a self-build mortgage, then you'll draw down funds at each one of these stages, so it's split into those stages for ease. So this is a summary page of these tabs at the bottom here. So just quickly showing you one, and there's a lot of information here. I don't expect you to fully understand it straight away, but just if you grasp the concept, then that's a good start. So this section here, so anything in here, this is the bill of quants. So if you pay somebody to produce a bill, this is what they'll do for you. It'll be a full schedule, full items with quantities. So that'll tell you exactly what's needed to build your house. Your job then, or if you get a quantity surveyor to cost it for you as well, they need to enter these rates. So that's this column here. So say we've got 100 square meters of bricks, the quantity surveyor's already confirmed that there's no rate there. So this is a section where we build up that rate. So in order to build 100 square meters of bricks on our site, we're going to need materials and we're going to need a subcontractor. So this is the two highlighted columns here. And like I said, there's suggestions of where you'd get those quotes. It varies on your build route, but this is assuming you're fairly involved. So materials for 1 square meter of brickwork, for example, let's say £60. And you get a quote from your bricklayer who wants, say, £50 per square meter to build that wall. So that spits out a rate of £110 per square meter. And that's the logic you would apply to each and every one of these items. Like I said, it's a lot of information. It's a daunting document, but if you grasp the concept of having a schedule of works to work to, it'll pay dividends in the long run when you come to getting on site. Value engineering. So at this point, if your costs have come in higher than anticipated, you've got two options. You increase your budget, not very likely, unless you're very fortunate, or you reduce your costs. If you opt to reduce the costs, this is known as value engineering. You've got a couple of options. The best one is to speak to your architect. You'll know exactly how much your projected overspend is, so you can then go back to your architect to say, look, I need to save 20 grand. Any suggestions? They know your scheme as well as you do. They should come up with some good options. But also do some investigation yourself. See if you can find cheaper alternative products. Speak to the people that have quoted for you. See if they've got any ideas on, cost-saving alternative materials that they've got deals on, or it's just basically asking around, prodding, trying to get those costs down. The important thing is, at this stage, you're not fully committed. If you can't value engineer it, then you can still at this stage go back to the broker and say, look, I'm probably going to need a bit more on my mortgage. So as long as you get it locked in before you draw down, then that's the important thing. And the final thing I'd just like to discuss is risks. So you just be mindful of any risks at this stage. And we define a risk as it's anything where either the scope of works is unknown, so you don't know what you're doing on site, or that you haven't got a fixed cost. So typical example, if you haven't got a ground investigation report, for example, then you may not know how deep you need to go for your foundations. You'll make an assessment and you'll get a quote on that assessment, but when the building control officer comes to site, he might say, no, I'm not happy with that. You need to go down an extra 500 mil, say. So the important thing is you know where your risks are and you make contingencies for them. So to mitigate any risk, you need to be aware that they're there. You need to allow a contingency, and you need to try to eliminate them before you start on site. And that's either by doing further investigations, seeking professional help, or getting fixed costs. So I think that's about me. Bit quick. Apologies if it was too quick, but we've got a Q&A, so feel free to ask questions.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was absolutely ram-packed with information. You did a cracking job on that, and I'm sure everyone else will agree. So thank you so much. Now's the opportunity to ask some questions. There's a few that have gone into the chat, so I'm just going to run through them. Also, feel free to raise your hand if you've got any that you would just want to say out loud. So the first question is, Ben, how much should building regs cost?
In terms to get building regs sign off, or to get, I mean, you're going to need building control drawings first of all. So your architect fees will usually take care of that. You're probably talking 2 or 3K, I would imagine, on a typical domestic dwelling. It could be a lot more than that if the house is a high spec and a large size, but building regs drawings, I wouldn't expect to pay any more than 2,000 or 3,000. And the building control inspection, so you'll relatively cheap, really. It depends who you use. You can use your local authority building control. I would expect it to be around the £1,000 mark. So they would come out at each stage of your build and sign it off, basically. So the cost is fairly minimal, is what I'd say in the grand scheme of things, maybe 1,500. You've got the option to use a private building control officer. Just one point on that, if there are any houses being built in the area, or if you're on a multi-plot site, speak to the other plot owners and see what sort of experience they're having and which route they've gone down. If they're having a particularly good experience with the local authority, then I'd stick with that, because one of the biggest things is them being aware of the ground conditions. So if they've inspected next door's plot, then they might even be able to give you some upfront advice to say, look, you're probably going to have to go a metre deep, which again comes back to reducing the risk early on. Just try and gather as much information as you can.
Brilliant, thank you. I hope that answers the question. And Kate asked, when you say project manager, should that be a percentage of your build cost, and how do you know what your build cost is? But I guess we've kind of gone through some of that, but what would the percentage be of the build cost?
It's a low, I think it's between 1% and 3%. That it'll say on the form when we email it out, it's a low percentage. You may not agree the cost up front, you may just agree the principle of it's a percentage of the build cost, so it'll be on a sliding scale. You'll have a rough idea, but if you follow the steps, you'll know your rough budget, and the project manager will be able to confirm a quote, I would imagine, at that stage. If he's seen the drawings, then he should be able to give you a fixed quote, but it's their prerogative, really. Okay,
I hope that helps you there, Kate. And the next question is from RDB, and he says, what are these costs based on, and where are they from? They seem quite low for Greater London.
Yeah, so they're based on just market averages, and there's a health warning, as I've mentioned, with these rates. They could be low, but they're the best we can do in the short amount of time. It is not a fixed cost document, it's an early viability, so treat it with caution. It's a guide and assistance, but don't commit to anything on that. Think of it as a sense check. It's, like I said earlier, it filters out any unsuitable plots. It is a main contractor looks at an early viability check, and if it shows promise, then they'll quickly proceed on to fixed costs. They don't do much off the back of it. It's just an early filter.
Okay, thank you. And Naomi says, this is super helpful, Jennifer and Ben, thank you. We're finding it a little bit of a challenge regarding lending, and most seem to want one contractor to manage the build, but our experience of smaller renovations is, we think, better to manage the costs, quality, etc. So we'll work with our builder and subcontractors. Have you found the same with lenders being very adverse to anything other than using a main contractor?
Personally, no. No, I don't think it's down to them to dictate your build route. They've got a duty of care. If you're submitting extremely low costs without an explanation of that, then they have got a right to ask. But it's down to you. If you're happy with it, it's your risk at the end of the day. I personally didn't need to justify anything. I am in the industry, but I didn't need to, confirm that to anyone or prove it. I think it's probably quite lender specific, that one. So if they won't budge on it, go elsewhere.
And Naomi, we have got, we work closely with Mayflower Mortgages. They're very, very experienced with self and custom build. So if you want to have a chat with anyone else, just reach out to us and we'll send you the details. Mary Joy's question is, I'd like to ask about service plots and how some of these costs might be included as part of the plot purchase. Just a general idea would be great.
Yeah, so they're a very good option actually, because it takes away a lot of the risk. I mentioned that main services, I can guide you on what a typical connection cost would be, but it could be wrong to the factor of 20 if it's an abnormal site. So you would simply omit any incoming service costs, to my knowledge. So your contract with the developer or land agent would be, you buy that plot and it's serviced, which means that the services will be available at the boundary. So you can almost guarantee you'll then be entitled to the standard connection costs only. So it's a very good option. It reduces that risk, and it also helps with your program, because you're not going to be waiting months and months for one of the utility companies.
Yeah, that's true. We had months of delays getting for National Grid for ours. Lisa says, this is super helpful. Any huge differences for conversions? For example, we have a brick coach house, so only block and beam interiors with no brickwork to be done as already in place.
Yeah, on that, I wouldn't recommend using the initial document based on that, because that is an all-in build rate, and the significant amount of that is the floor, the external walls and the roof. So unfortunately, you're going to need to progress straight on to the detailed cost plan. So again, if you're not confident in producing a schedule of works, get somebody to draw it up for you. We can do it, other people are available. Conversion, they're just so bespoke. You need a specific schedule of works to get any sort of accurate costs on it, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Kate says, where would you put things like solar and ground source / air source heating? And do you have any average figure for these?
Ground source, no, it's not that. It varies massively in terms of the ground conditions. Not that many people do it. You need a big area, so it's fairly bespoke. I'd be hesitant to put a figure on that. I would speak to people. They'll be able to give you an indication. Any local specialist will be able to give you some approximate figures on that. PV is easier. I don't have the figures to hand, but we could give you some rough ideas of a potential. Well, saying that, I know we do a lot of social housing, and we would typically allow between 5 and 7K for solar installation, but there's that many variables in terms of, do you want battery storage with that, the size, the output? So yeah, depending on the size of the house, in the region of between 5 and 10K I'd be initially, but again, you can get a quote pretty quick. So if any item you're concerned on, send inquiries, is my advice, because somebody's assessment isn't the same as somebody offering to do the work.
And also, Kate, I've got an independent renewable energy consultant. It's quite a mouthful, that I recommend. He's come on and done a masterclass previously as well. So if you'd like the contact details, just drop us an email and I'll send them over to you. And you can quite quickly get a few quotes from them as well. And they'll look at your site individually. David's question is, are there any figures for kitchens, bathrooms, flooring, energy systems? Are these included?
So they would be included in the budget rates, but they are budget rates. The kitchens, as we all know, vary massively. We factor that in slightly on the specification level. So we've got the high, or the excellent, standard, and I can't remember the figures. There are 3 different options on specifications. So I probably sound like a bit like a broken record, but you can get a quote for a kitchen pretty easily. Anyone could, well, quite a few companies will do a design for you. We're partnered with Howdens, but there's others available. So again, if you're able to get a cost and a quote and you know what you want, there's no harm in getting it, even if you're 18 months away from needing it on site. You know, if you yet to put a spade in the ground, still get a quote. It's easier to update one than take a guess and be miles out initially.
Brilliant, thank you. Dan's question is, are there situations where you'd recommend using a cost plus contract with a general builder, and any things to consider as a self-builder?
Cost plus, they're a good idea, but you do need some professional backup from the client's point of view, because it involves a lot of trust, I think, on the builder's part. I'm all for it if you get the right builder, you think they're trustworthy, but I would get some impartial advice along the way. They're going to know if you're getting your leg lifted by the builder. So agree the percentage uplift. It's good because it's good for the builder, because they're not at risk. You know, it's a shared risk, shared gain kind of strategy. But there's the trust element. It's just in the back of my mind. If you get a shady contractor, then you could soon get in trouble on that one, because there's no maximum price. But if you're educated and you've got some support, absolutely go for it.
Okay. Emily's question is, if I dig into the basement, how much cost do I need to estimate? The basement may involve removing the existing flooring under an existing building and a garden area.
Yeah, so that's an abnormal. I can't give you a rate, unfortunately. There's so many variables to that, and groundworks are the worst. If you're going to get a problem, it's likely to be in the ground, because the variance on ground conditions and subsequent mitigation strategies are massive. So without knowing more about your specific plot, I wouldn't be comfortable putting a figure to it. You need to be speaking to structural engineers. You're going to need to furnish them with a ground investigation report so that they know what to design. And only at that point can you then get quotes. I wouldn't go in, I wouldn't commit to a mortgage or a plot of land or anything until I've got those bottomed out, because they're notoriously expensive and the price range is huge, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Kate's asked, will you be sending out the more detailed feasibility spreadsheet as well as the initial budget one, did you say?
I didn't say. We can do. I mean, drop us an email. We'll help you through it. We're hesitant to do so because without a lot of additional guidance, it may not be of much use to you. So by all means, I'm happy to send it out, but you may need some backup support from us on that one, and we'd obviously be more than happy to do that. That's why we're here. But I didn't want to furnish it to everybody, because not knowing your education and well, not education, your experience and how involved you want to be, it may be of limited use to you. But the idea that, I mean, it's promising for me that you're thinking about these things. I do think people need those schedule of works for their build. That's key for me, for self-builders, to stop or prevent getting themselves in trouble. So I'll send it out, send us an email, but we probably need to talk more.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ben. I'm conscious we've gone over time, so I'm going to wrap it up. But first of all, we did promise 2 bonuses to everyone that stayed on. The first one you've probably guessed, which is that budget spreadsheet, which will be very useful for anybody at the beginning of their journey. The second bonus is that we're offering a 30-minute call to everybody that's on this masterclass with us this evening. So if either of those would be useful, please drop your email into the chat. And tomorrow I'll email you all with the opportunity to book a call in and with that budget spreadsheet attached, as a thank you for attending live as well. So I hope that you all found it really useful. We've got lots more of these scheduled in. Feel free to send us any topics that you'd like to hear about, or just email in with general questions, and we'll do our very best to help as many of you as we can. So thank you for attending, and a massive thank you to Ben for this evening. That was really fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.